President Obama on a state visit to Greece and his warning to Europe not to repeat the wars of the 20th century. And starving in Mosul. As the battle to liberate Iraq's second city continues, we'll bring you a snapshot of what life there is like. Those and more of the biggest stories of the past 7 days. This is Insight Review. Welcome to Insight Review, our look back at the stories that have dominated the headlines for the past 7 days. This week, President Obama visits Greece, and Syria's president says Donald Trump could be a natural ally. We'll examine those stories with our guests, the author and broadcaster Lucy Beresford and the executive editor of the social media company Hub Culture, Edie Lush. But first, here's what you need to know about what happened this week. 7 days in 60 seconds.
Barack Obama embarked on his final state visit as US president. He's visiting Greece, Germany and Peru. Speaking in Athens, he warned the world is facing a rise in a crude sort of nationalism following Brexit and the result of the US election. Donald Trump began appointing key positions in his administration, naming a far right-wing media executive as his chief strategist. The Syrian president said only time would tell if Trump could deliver on his promises, but said the incoming president could be a natural ally. François Hollande's former economy minister Emmanuel Macron announced his candidacy in the 2017 French presidential election. The 38-year-old, who's never run for elected office, will stand as an independent candidate. And Egypt's highest court of appeal has overturned the death sentence for the country's former president, Mohamed Morsi. A retrial will now be held for the deposed leader, who was overthrown in a military coup in 2013.
So with just a few months remaining before Barack Obama's 8 years in the White House comes to an end, the outgoing US president has embarked on his final overseas trip, visiting Greece, Germany and Peru. This week he toured the birthplace of modern democracy, the Athens Acropolis, where he warned of the danger of Europe's far right.
We know what happens when Europeans start dividing themselves up and emphasizing their differences and seeing a competition between various countries in a zero-sum way. The 20th century was a bloodbath.
Well, joining me today is the author and broadcaster Lucy Beresford. Also here is Edie Lush, an author and the executive editor of the social media company Hub Culture. Welcome. President Obama, even amongst his critics, he's probably going to be missed, Edie, isn't he?
I think he's going to be missed, and I think he's going to miss being part of the world stage. In fact, after he went to Greece, he goes to Berlin and is featured with Angela Merkel saying, you know, it's really hard to say goodbye.
His lecture, because it was a bit like that during a press conference in Berlin, was noted. He was very professorial, so perhaps giving a hint of what he's planning to do next.
Where his next departure might be, exactly. But it's interesting that the countries that he has chosen to go to, he's going to Greece, going to Germany, going to Peru. Great to have a sort of president going down to Latin America, but isn't coming to the UK, particularly after his intervention, as some saw it, in advance of the Brexit vote. That it's interesting, it's partly about his legacy, it's partly about him saying thank you to some of his friends, but it might also be interpreted as a snub for the countries that he hasn't gone to visit.
But also perhaps wanting to put a brake on this phenomenon. If we join the dots of Brexit and then Trump winning, and we've got elections in France. Marine Le Pen is being talked of course, a first-round candidate, but actually maybe getting through to the final runoff as well. And Germany has an election too, so perhaps putting a marker down there that these alternative candidates don't necessarily spell a very prosperous future.
I think it was interesting that Marine Le Pen welcomed Trump's victory and said that, and she connected the dots, as you said, from Brexit to the US election. I think it was really interesting what he chose to talk about in Berlin, which was the problems of fake news coming through on Facebook and Google. And if you looked at the last set of news cycle before the election, the kind of news that was on Facebook was whether whether Secretary of State Clinton would have was going to use some sort of radiological attack, whether John Podesta was actually part of the occult. So these were stories on Facebook before the election. We've also seen stories on the other side. So we had somebody yesterday was saying that some of the news stories that he'd been promoting, fake news stories, he'd put up there against Trump. So it is a huge problem. And I think Obama's absolutely right to mention this as one of the issues that influenced the election and that needs to be.
And it's the word of the year, apparently, here in the UK.
Right.
Post-truth is a phenomenon that we're actually all having to grapple with. What does that actually mean for everyday discourse? And what does it mean in particular when you think that you're being given information which you think is factual and you're using that to base your vote on, but actually it turns out to be what some might call a lie, post-truth?
We'll have to leave that hanging in the air and see if we can stick to the real truth as we discuss our next topics. Donald Trump's White House transition team appeared to be in disarray this week, with the former Republican Congressman Mike Rogers quitting without explanation. Channeling his former incarnation as host of The Apprentice, the president-elect said only he knew who the finalists were. So let's take a look at who Donald Trump has appointed so far. He has given a job to the former chairman of the Republican National Committee, Reince Priebus. He's going to be the White House Chief of Staff, as well as the former head of the far-right website Breitbart News, Steve Bannon. He's going to be the White House Chief Strategist. His appointment was controversially welcomed by the white supremacist group, the KKK. Vice President-elect Mike Pence has replaced Governor Chris Christie as chairman of the Trump's White House transition team. Well, Lucy and Edie are still with us. What do you make of that team so far? Lucy, you go first.
Well, it feels very personal. It doesn't feel as if Trump has necessarily canvassed opinion beyond his little group of supporters, because some people, when they come into office, particularly if they have absolutely zero political experience, might actually put their hands up and say, you know, I don't know everything, so I'm going to cherry pick from everybody. I'm going to bring lots of people inclusively inside my tent. And he hasn't done that. But then we know that Trump is a man who loves to be in control. All of his body language suggests that he loves to be the leader of the show, and it's probably not going to be any different now that he's moved from a reality TV show to actually ruling the most strongest country in the world.
Isn't that one of the lessons for him, that actually running a company or being
ought to be very different. Ought to be very different.
Being a president is a very different job. In fact, Obama himself seemed to hint at that.
Yes, the problem is that particularly for very let's say high achieving males, the very things that can actually propel them to greatness can end up also becoming the things that become their greatest flaw, their Achilles heel. And Trump is someone who has oodles of testosterone and oodles of self-belief. And you don't just lose that overnight just because your role in life has changed. I think he's got quite a big learning curve to go through.
And do you think, therefore, he will find the nuances of presidential life, where he does have to deal with the other instruments of government, like Congress, like the Senate, like his special advisors, like international affairs, like other world leaders? Do you think he might tire of this, or he might find it very difficult to adjust?
There is a suggestion by some folks, again, who knows who these people are, right? But that he might only last a year. I'm not sure that's going to happen unless we see some kind of, something coming from Congress to try to get rid of him. I don't think that's going to happen. I think what's interesting, we look at who else he's appointing. We've also seen him nominate General Michael Flynn as National Security Advisor. And just to talk about this sort of post-truth moment that we're also living in, this is a man who has said that Sharia law is spreading in the United States. Now, that's not true. This is also a man who tweeted back in February that it's rational to be afraid of Muslims in the United States. And the link that he put on was to a link to an incredibly anti-Muslim video saying that, well, since Muslims were responsible for these previous terrorist attacks, therefore they are to be feared. So it's very interesting who he chooses to surround himself by, and if these are the people who are influencing him. They became very close during the campaign. This is a man who was leading a call to lock Hillary up. during national rallies.
But the family members as too, Lucy. I mean, that's something that in the same degree you can do in a company or your own business, where you can do what the hell you like, by and large, if the shareholders agree. You can't just do that in government. You can't just plant, give jobs to this and this person, particularly if they're supposed to be detached running his family trust.
I think one of the things he might say is that happens around the world. There are lots of other countries where that happens all the time. Now, we might frown on that, but he might argue, the best person for the job, somebody I trust, because it's slightly, it often verges on hinging on sort of paranoia, that actually his safety net might feel to him that he needs his family around him. It could be that they're the ones that turn around and say, actually, you know what, Dad, or you know what, father-in-law or whatever, I don't think I am the right person for the job. There might be other people out there.
But just remember that Bill Clinton put Hillary Clinton in charge of health care in his first administration. And she tried to do a great job. She had an office in the White House, so there are ways around the rules.
Well, much more on Mr. Trump to come in a moment. He's been a man who's accused of carrying out war crimes against his own people. But Syria's President Bashar al-Assad says Donald Trump's presidency could signal a new era in relations with the US.
For us, it's still dubious whether he can do or live up to his promises or not. That's why we are very cautious in judging him, especially as he wasn't in a political position before. So we cannot tell anything about what he's going to do. But if, let's say if he's going to fight the terrorists, of course we're going to be ally, natural ally in that regard, with the Russians, with the Iranians, with many other countries.
Well, Lucy and Edie are with me. Foreign affairs is one of the big challenges for this group, and we don't, as we record our programme, don't know who's going to be the Secretary of State. But the relationship with Syria, Lucy, so far, America is part of an international point of view that President Assad's time is over and he ought to leave office. That might be about to change?
That might be about to change, not least because Trump has made no secret of his admiration for Putin, who of course is one of Assad's, if not Assad's biggest backer. And on some level, I think people are prepared to acknowledge that if you could actually establish a better relationship with Russia in general, that might be a good thing for geopolitics in general. But what is the nature of Trump's actual relationship with Putin, and is it just puff, is it just hype, or could these two men actually work together, and could that then bring about some kind of resolution within Syria? Because at the moment nobody seems to be able to get through to President Assad apart from Putin.
But Edie, they have mutually contradictory reasons for wanting to influence what happens in Syria, don't they? I mean, Russia just wants to have a foothold in that part of the world.
And I wonder how much effect the United States is going to have, because there isn't a huge amount of support for boots on the ground from the United States.
Not boots.
Congress.
But there are flights, there are drones.
Absolutely.
They're active over there.
And I'm interested, what I've read in terms of the countries that are having the most influence in Syria at the moment, obviously it's Russia on one hand, and then it's Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia on the other hand. So United States absolutely has played an influence, but it hasn't been as much as potentially it could be or could have been. As you say, we don't know who the Secretary of State is. It could be Rudy Giuliani, it could be John Bolton, it could be a number of folks that we're not sure, and that I think will have a huge effect on what happens in Syria. I think it's interesting. I think that the first leader to contact Trump was the president of Egypt. Right?
Yeah.
And quite similar to...
Well, that was a bit of a fluke, wasn't it? He just happened to dial up Trump Tower and get put through.
It's extraordinary, right? But this seems to be the way that some of these politics and these...
It's certainly a new way of doing things.
It's a kind of informal network. I heard that someone in Australia managed, through a golfing contact, got hold of Trump's mobile number and was able to phone him on his actual mobile. So everything could be completely up for grabs here. And if it brings about some kind of change, because at the moment I think we're in a stalemate, and it's arguable that if Hillary had got in, there wouldn't have been a change in outlook and a change in due process. But actually what Trump might be able to do, even if he delegates to other people, is that and I think the other interesting thing is we don't know. There's this amazing unknown quantity to it all, whereby actually that's his greatest moment of power. We don't know which way he's going to jump, and in that he might be able to surprise us.
A positive.
He's sort of the ultimate unknown unknown.
Yes, as someone once said.
Absolutely. OK, this is Insight Review you're watching. Coming up, as the battle for Mosul rages on, those trapped in the city struggle to find the basics, including food.
you.